Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Inside Groove. And Dustin, it is time for the Daytona 500. We saw racing over the weekend, and now it's time. Next week at this time,
Sunday,
we'll be talking about the 500.
We'll be talking about who our Daytona 500 champion is. It is pretty cool. And speaking of pretty cool things, you want to tell me what's going on behind me, Nick?
Yeah, we have a magical new addition to our studio here that we're using as we get ready to start the new season. We'll be putting different graphics and pictures and backdrops on there throughout the show. So excited about that. We get rid of our little TV that's been fine and good for us for the first season of our show. But as we move on to our second season here, I thought it was appropriate to kind of add a little bit of a bigger kind of thing, I guess.
Well, it's nice because, you know, that you can do so much with a green screen, right? And we can put out visuals of what we're talking about, what we want to talk about, and it's pretty simple. It's a lot of fun. We want to thank Zach back in the control room for doing a lot of the legwork on making this happen. Really the MVP of Northwest Access TV when you think about it. So with that out of the way, let's talk some racing, Nick.
Yeah, and we have a lot to talk about this week. We saw the Clash on Sunday. A very, well, how do we put this nicely?
I thought it was an okay race.
And
I had trail mix on my way in, so I had a peanut stuck in my throat. I thought it was an okay race, but I felt gypped by the ending. I felt just as we were starting to get that action, and it's over. And I really am concerned that Daytona is going to be like that.
Yeah, that's something that we'll talk about. We also saw Daytona 500 pole qualifying, and that was just as interesting as the Clash, if you ask me, as Dustin forgets to turn his sound off here. But I mean, that qualifying was fascinating to me to see, who's got the speed, who's got stuff to work on. That session right there just kind of sets the tone for the rest of Speed Weeks for a lot of people. And so that was interesting. We've got the Gatorade, or well, not the Gatorade Duels anymore. It hasn't been the Gatorade.
Do you know the sponsor?
A long time. It's the Gander Outdoors.
Is it Gander Outdoors? I thought they were the Can-Am Duels.
It was Can-Am, but now I'm pretty sure it's Gander Outdoors. They've changed it up on us multiple times throughout the last 5 years. But the duels are coming up on Thursday night. That's always a good night to be excited for.
Gander RV Duels.
Oh, wow. The Gander RV Duels from Daytona, Thursday night on Fox. And those races are always fun because it's the first point race of the season at Daytona.
I love how it's like an excuse to get you to watch the race because it's like, maybe 1 or 2 points for the winner. Nothing a lot, just a couple bonus points, like stage points, but it makes the incentive nicer. It's pretty cool to be able to get a fresh start on the start of the season point-wise.
And it's, it's not a non-points event either. I mean, you get the points, but there's also other stuff to race for, whereas in the Clash, you're kind of just racing out there for fun, kind of trying to get a feel of the track and of the car as you shake the rust off going into 2019. The duels, though, they're different. You've got to show up and do really well in these races if you want a decent starting spot in the Daytona 500, which can be so important.
Well, there are two strategies to the duels. Before we get too deep into it, there is I'm trying to get that 3rd or 4th place starting spot, and then there is I've accepted it's okay to start towards the end of the pack. I don't want to tear up my race car type of approach. But before we get to the duels, definitely want to take a look at this past weekend. I see you don't have ARCA in here, and I'm disappointed in you, Nick.
Well, Dustin, let's talk about ARCA then. I didn't get to see the ARCA race personally, but I heard it was really good. We saw Harrison Burton win the race. Jeff Burton's son,
obviously. It was kind of like the snooze fest of the Clash, but slightly better in the sense that there was a good amount of single file racing. But because it was ARCA, you had some young, unexperienced drivers, and everybody was trying for it at the end, and there was a big one towards the end of that race there. But it was a lot of fun to see some of the future talent, Natalie Decker finished 6th. Not a bad debate for her. And then, Burton won that race. So DGR Crossley had a pretty dominant race. It's really interesting to see, I grew up watching, Ward Burton, Jeff Burton, and to see the kids, I think Harrison is Jeff's kid, I believe. To see Jeff Burton's kid put a car into victory lane at Daytona was pretty cool. I love it when they put ARCA on FS1. I think it makes it more accessible. And one of the things NASCAR should do for the next contract is make it so you can put ARCA on FS1 for all the races. So you can see all the short tracks.
ARCA is a really good... ARCA and the K&N series are just so much fun to watch because you've got these young kids racing around the best short tracks in America. This is really what... a lot of NASCAR fans are begging for with the Cup Series, and you're not going to see the stars of the household names of NASCAR, but you're going to get to learn about these guys. It's like watching college basketball or college football because you're watching these kids who are 16, 17, 18, 19 years old running around out here at these little short tracks. These are the stars of tomorrow for NASCAR, and for that to be televised on these bigger networks is a huge deal. So
there's a K&N race right now on at a nice short track. It's on Fans Choice TV, so it's not really accessible, yet you have someone like Haley Deegan, a rising star racing in that race. So it was fun. Also, the thing about the ARCA race that was really cool is it felt just long enough. I didn't get bored with it, and that's what I liked. It wasn't like one of those things where it's like, I'm going to take a nap in the middle and miss some of the action. It was like, you know what? I'm just going to watch this race all the way through. So I really liked it. That's my little tidbit about ARCA. Now we can get back to the big boys.
We'll get into the length of these races. Matt Weaver sent out an interesting tweet during the Clash yesterday that got me thinking, and we'll discuss that later on. But we've got to discuss this Clash right now. What a race that was on Sunday afternoon. It frustrated me for the most part because, it was just instantly, lap one was just single file racing around the top side of the racetrack. We've seen that happen the last few restrictor plate races, especially in the fall at Talladega last year. And, then as soon as these guys went to pull out and we were like, okay, there's 20 laps to go, we're going to get to see some really good racing. We don't know if rain's on the way, which ultimately it was. But as soon as these guys started actually racing with 20 laps to go, everybody wrecked. I mean, it was just a race that I get super excited for, but it just didn't, it was frustrating ultimately for me.
It was one of those races where, you tune in and you're happy to see racing, but with nothing to race for in those first 60 laps or so, there is no incentive to race side by side. There is no incentive to actually go for it. There was one competition caution. They had one red flag. It felt like the race was broken up. It was definitely a clash to forget until that wreck. That was one of the best wrecks I've seen in a while. And that wreck was still, you feel bad for Paul Menard. He was dominating, one lap later, rain falls. That's the race.
Right.
And he gets taken out by Jimmy Johnson again. This is the second straight time Jimmy Johnson has taken Paul Menard out on a plate track. Third in the last 2 or 3 years. Jimmy Johnson, Paul Menard do not like each other.
Well, I just think I don't think it's Jimmy Johnson not liking Paul Menard. I think it's just a case of Jimmy Johnson
being in the wrong place at
the wrong time. And Paul Menard, absolutely, he has no reason to like Jimmy Johnson. I don't blame him for not liking him. But I didn't have a problem with the accident. Jimmy Johnson obviously made a mistake. But obviously that was not an intentional crash.
No, he was going for it. He was trying to get the pass. He knew the rain was coming. You make that move. There's 15 left to go. So you make that move. Paul Menard came down the block just a bit too late, but
he didn't even come down all that much.
No, I don't think he came down that much. I think Jimmy kind of ran into him a little bit.
Jimmy lost his car. It looked like it went back up the track. So, it was frustrating to see the way that race ended. I think that, if they would have been given the opportunity to race, Jimmy Johnson doesn't make that move with 15 to go. The rain's not coming. I think we're in a much different situation where we get to see a really good finish here. But just frustrating overall because it felt like, the first 50, 60 laps of this race, we're just sitting here saying, okay, when does it start? These guys are just racing single file all the way around, and then rain delay after rain delay in this race. I believe there was two of them. Two times the cars had to come down onto pit road for the red flag with the rain delay. And so, just frustrating to start this season. And Kevin Harvick, on his SiriusXM show Happy Hours today was talking about this race, and he said that the Clash, shouldn't be around next year, when NASCAR releases the new schedules, that they should go ahead.
Kevin Harvick loves complaining about anything that isn't pro Kevin Harvick, in the sense of this dude has complained about everything lately. And I like the Clash. You want to know why I like the Clash? What was on TV on Sunday?
Right.
Nothing.
Well,
so
you had the Alliance
of American Football. Yeah. It's a good pre-teaser to get some cars on track and to just get some action, to get the casual NASCAR fan, or to get the NASCAR fan who's been waiting all offseason back into it. It's nice to see those cars on the track. It's nice to see some of the new teams. It's good to see them together. And you could say, well, add another practice session. Well, no, you don't get to see the practices. I liked it. I like the Clash, and I hope the Clash stays for a while.
Well, here's my problem with the Clash, and I have to agree with Kevin Harvick on this one. It was just, this race doesn't really do anything for me. Other than it being the opening race and saying, okay, this is awesome, NASCAR is back. I couldn't care about, there's nothing going on. There's no points. There's money, but what does that do for me? I mean, it's not $1 million like the All-Star race. These teams are going out here and wrecking the entire field and losing. Denny Hamlin lost 2 race cars in 2 days. There was 21 cars involved in accidents over the practice session and the race for the Clash in a non-points race. I just don't think that we're at the point where the Clash either needs to be completely overhauled and fixed, or it just needs to be taken away, because right now, the incentive isn't good enough for race teams.
So you ready for my how to fix the Clash?
I am.
This is how you fix the Clash. The All-Star race pays out $1 million for a win, right?
Right.
Daytona is the mecca of NASCAR. I want to call it the $1 million stages. So that's what you do. You take the 75 laps. You give yourself 3 25-lap stages. The winner of each stage gets $1 million, all right? The winner of each stage gets $1 million. You have to pit. You have to pit during the race one time to take tires and fuel. It has to be under green.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It has to be under green. You cannot pit during the stage caution. You can, but it does not count towards your performance. Along with that, I wrote, let me see. I just want to get exactly what I wrote down. Field is inverted after every stage.
That would be cool. So we actually saw one of our a comment on our post, or on our Facebook live feed last week, say the field should be inverted at the end of each stage. I love that. I think that would be huge, not only just for this race, but for the rest of the race.
Field is inverted at the end of each $1 million stage.
Right.
So you can win up to $3 million, which gives you the incentive to wreck some of these cars.
Right.
It's 25 lap sprints, so you don't have, at most you have people sitting around for 10, 15 laps maybe.
Right.
And then you have the pit stop. And then one other thing. If you have 20 cars, how many pit spots are there, Nick, if you have 20 cars? Do some math. How many extra pit spots are there?
Probably about 20, yeah.
About 23. So you put the cars from pit stall 23 to 43. And then once you get the pit stall number 2, or no, pit stall number 22, no pit road speed limit. You get to race off pit road. You get to accelerate off pit road.
Yeah, I think that last part is a little bit dangerous, because
it's drag racing basically, in the sense of you get them away from the crew members, and then you have them drag race off pit road. That is how you make the Clash, and you don't have to do that pit road part, but that is how you make the Clash a fun race to watch. You make it so there's money involved. There is excitement. There's, everything you want in a race is right there.
Yeah.
The cheapest way, I would say, to make the Clash a race that is worthy, offer points. Yeah. I think it is perfectly valid to say to the 16 playoff drivers and then the pole winners who might be into this race as well, that you come, you race, you get points. 15 points for a win, 10 points for second, 5 points for third, 1 point for fourth and fifth. It's not a lot, but make it a points race to the point where you want to go there, and the incentive to win, because 15 points could be big. I like what they did with the duels. I like the idea of being able to go into Daytona with a 25 to 30 points going into that first race of the year. It'll make everything more interesting. That's the cheap way to do it.
Right. Yeah,
that's how I fix the Clash.
I think that would be a version of that would be really, really good for the Clash. But yeah, I mean, right now, going at it where, there's marginal money that's not the same amount as the All-Star race, no points, and at a track where you're very likely about 50-50 to wreck your car. In a day and age where we're talking so much about cutting costs in this sport, the Clash is one of the worst things.
You have to make it worth it. And the way you make it worth it is by giving the incentive with either points or money. You do either of those things and it'll be worth it.
Now, real quickly, before we move on from the Clash, they did call the race with 16 laps to go. There was 4 cars that made it through the crash.
There were 6 cars that could have drafted.
Six cars.
Maybe eight.
6 to 8 cars. The latter 4 of that group having sustained moderate damage in the crash. NASCAR called the race at around 5 p.m. Daytona, obviously a track that has lights. We saw in the jet dryer incident, they raced until 2 in the morning. Did you agree with NASCAR calling this race? Were you okay with that?
I'm fine with NASCAR calling this race because you've already had 2 red flags. You're already up against the clock TV-wise. It's one of those things where if this race mattered, I'd be mad. But because you weren't going to have a race anyway, you were going to have 6 cars.
I think I think that was the main reason.
It was
especially for 16 laps.
It was going to be a glorified practice session, basically, and it would have been fun to see. But at this point, the rain. Don't go to the effort of paying those people to drive the track out and do all that extra work.
Yeah,
it's not worth it.
I think that's in there.
We got a photo of the crash behind us. That's neat.
Yeah, but they. A couple of things to note. There was nothing on track afterwards, after the Clash, so they could have done it. And there was, and after that race got finished, there was a pre-recorded NHRA event that was on tape delay. So it's not like they were in anything binding track-wise or TV-wise. So interesting note there. If you want to call in, talk about the Clash. What were your thoughts? Did you tune in? And we'll talk about that there. 802-528-5315. Call us up and we'll talk about some Daytona racing. What are your reactions and thoughts of what we saw yesterday in the racing at Daytona? But let's move on, Dustin, to the qualifying on Sunday right before the Clash. And this, like I said earlier, this was just as entertaining to me as the Clash itself.
I like pole qualifying. Pole day is fun. It means absolutely nothing. I don't take any stock in pole day. Let me get to the pole day notes. It means nothing. It means nothing to me. You have in here no pole sitter has won the 500 since Jared did it in 2000. Hendrick is always fast. This is the thing with Team Hendrick. So
has won the last 5 poles.
Hendrick has won the last 5 poles, and they're really fast. They got the front row again with the 24 and the 88. I love seeing Bowman up there. Bowman's my guy. Bowman is my. I hate HMS. I hate Hendrick Motorsports so much. But Bowman is my guy. Bowman the showman.
If we ever have anybody from HMS on, we're going to cut that part out.
Well, Bowman did his time in a BK racing ride.
Yeah.
And he did well. So I like Bowman. It's great to have speed on pole day, except for the fact that it doesn't matter whatsoever.
Right.
I look at the guys. I look at Richard Childress Racing, who Daniel Hemrick was fast in the draft.
Was fast. I was not expecting Hemrick to be quick.
Dylan was fast in the draft. Ty Dillon was fast in the draft. Yep. Bubba Wallace was fast in the draft. I look at the cars that did well in practice. I look at the cars who did well in the draft, and I look at those cars as my favorites. The Toyotas. Plenty of speed. Joe Gibbs Racing should be a force. The Fords, especially in race conditions when you looked at the Clash, the Fords have speed this year. Team Penske,
as they always do, yeah.
Team Penske has the Mustang figured out more than Stewart-Haas Racing. It was pretty obvious that Team Penske was faster than
Stewart-Haas isn't it? I think Stewart-Haas is the 3rd best team at restrictor plate tracks in the Ford camp anyways.
It's the 2nd best team in the Ford camp.
Front row.
You think front row?
Front row Motorsports is so good. Watch them. We haven't seen those cars in a race setting yet. Watch them on Thursday. Michael McDowell,
what I like about
David
Thursday.
Reagan. They both will run top 10 very consistently. They always do at the restrictor plate tracks. Reagan has a win in the Cup Series at the restrictor plate tracks, and McDowell's come very close. I think Matt Tifft is a work in progress. We'll see from him. But that 38 and the 34 car, they have it nailed down. Stewart-Haas is not a good restrictor plate racing team. Kurt Busch got the lucky win there in 2017. Eric Almirola earned the win at Talladega
It's never that Daytona is
it's always
their
been
bread and
Penske.
butter.
Yeah.
It's Talladega where Stewart-Haas does well, but Daytona is not their thing. And it was really interesting to see how they did in race conditions. They didn't really do great either in the race conditions, as they had, 3 of 4 cars in the race. I think they actually had all 4 cars in the race because Suarez won a pole last year.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see. So we got to mention William Bryan, cannot pronounce his name, Vanilla Ice Cream in the 24. And that's what he is because he's the most vanilla driver ever. Won the pole. He's got a fast car. I like that 24. It's got a good paint scheme. It looks slick. He's not going to win because he's going to wreck.
Wow.
But
Dustin holding nothing back on the
nothing
Hendrick
back
cars
because the Hendrick cars.
Are you mad that they absolutely dominated qualifying?
No, I'm not mad. I kind of expected Chase Elliott to get the pole. I was shocked that 04 had the speed in pole day because normally, Chase Elliott does well, and then either the 88 or the 24 does well. Jimmy Johnson is never up there for the most part. And he was able to get 4th, and it doesn't matter because, 3rd through 40 are set in the duels, but it was interesting to me to see how fast they were and that Chase Elliott wasn't the fastest. So I wonder how is that going to translate to race conditions?
Yeah.
That's my question, because if you remember when Dale Jr. rolled out the 88 Amelia a couple years ago, super fast.
Yeah.
Couldn't handle it. Couldn't handle in the draft. Couldn't drive in the draft well. Wrecked it. I think wrecked it twice.
Wrecked it multiple times. Zach, let's get the Daytona 500 pole qualifying results up here because I was really interested in looking at the speeds that these guys ran and the gaps in between. When we get this up here, we'll see William Byron ran almost 2 miles per hour faster than Alex Bowman did, or than Daniel Hemrick did. I mean, look at that. Just a huge gap in between the 4 Hendrick cars, who are Byron, Bowman, Johnson, and Elliott, and then 5th and Daniel Hemrick. And Hemrick ran a very good lap, don't get me wrong. But those Hendrick cars clearly have something figured out, all
they got something
very
figured
close to
out,
each other.
But once again, you look at how they do in practice. They weren't the best in the draft. So the question is going to be how much of that speed can translate into actual race conditions. So, like I've said, the 24, I don't think he's got a chance to win the pole, or not win the pole, but win the race. Does it make them a top team again? These are your notes. No. No, not at all.
You don't think it makes them a top, you don't think Hendrick
They lucked into 3 wins last year, Nick. That was it. They are still slow.
There's no doubt that it was a down year for Hendrick, but you don't think that them not only getting the front row once again, we've seen them get the pole last 5 years, get the front row the last close to 5 years as well. But you don't think that them getting all 4 cars at the top of the charts by such a large gap over everybody else, you don't think that makes that's kind of them flexing their muscle on the rest of the sport, saying, we're still here?
No, absolutely not. I look at Hendrick Motorsports and I see a former titan of the sport who has fallen behind Stewart-Haas, who has fallen behind Penske, who has fallen behind, Joe Gibbs Racing. You can make the argument that there are 4 teams in the garage that are faster than them at this point. And, yes, they had a good day on the restrictor plate track, but I need to see it later in the season. And I need to see it in the 500. I need to see how they can do. If they're up, if they're up front all day and then they get taken out towards the end, I'm willing to say, okay, they got a good program that's going to be good, but I got to see it in race conditions.
And obviously you take everything that has to do with the Daytona 500 qualifying, all of Speed Weeks, you take it with a grain of salt. Even the race you take with a grain of salt.
Yeah, because you can have guys who finish in the top 10 who don't finish in the top 10 again for the season. It is what it is.
Exactly. But I think that they are primed for a comeback year this year. They have these same resources as everybody else. Don't think that Hendrick Motorsports and Rick Hendrick are going to let these guys lag behind like they were last year. He's come out and said this was an awful season, unacceptable. It won't happen again. I believe him. I think that Hendrick Motorsports is going to come out with a vengeance this year. They've got some more experience with their drivers. You look at Bowman, that was his first year in that car. William Byron, his rookie year. Jimmy Johnson's kind of fading backwards a little bit. Chase Elliott had the best year of his career. I think Chase Elliott will win 5 races this year. I think Jimmy Johnson's going to win. I think William Byron's going to be better than people expect. And I think Alex Bowman will surprise some people as well. Last year was a growing pain year for Hendrick Motorsports because simply they didn't have the driver talent. Now I think that's back a little bit. I think Jimmy Johnson's new the crew chief with change with Johnson and Bowman or Byron is going to pay huge dividends. I think that's pressing the reset button on Jimmy Johnson's career.
Yeah, and I think it'll be interesting.
I think they're all going to be really good this year.
I think they'll have a decent year. I think Chase Elliott will win 3 races again. I think Jimmy will get in victory lane again. I don't know about the 24 and 88. I hope the 88 gets the victory lane. 24 might be able to steal one. I still think he's a couple years away from being able to compete at Cup. He's going to be good in Cup, but I think he's a couple years away still from being that contender. Yeah. But we want to talk about some of the other cars in the pack besides HMS. What are some other things you want to note from qualifying while we're here?
Qualifying, we saw Kyle Larson, and Larson did not run well at all in qualifying. He was all the way back in 32nd on
that was such an odd run for me because they came back from a break and he looked it looked slow. And when it looks slow on TV, you wonder yourself, what's going on there? Like, because he wasn't fast in practice either. Like when Ty Dillon and Bubba Wallace, when they ran slow, it was like their cars are not set up for single car qualifying. Right. Their cars are set up for the race. But when Kyle Larson ran slow, it's kind of like, what is he doing here? Like all the Ganassi cars just... Even in the Clash,
Ganassi did not look great. Even though Kurt Busch finished second in the Clash,
which doesn't count, but okay.
Right. I was kind of surprised by this as well. I was looking at this and saying, "Wow, okay, Kyle Larson is 32nd." Looking at the guys that were in front of him at the time, just terrible performance.
Field fillers. He was in the same realm as the field fillers.
Right. He was running the same lap times as Matt Tifft. Casey Mears and Ryan Truex were both faster than him.
If you made it so you had the qualifying ratio way in, Larson would be in danger of missing with his qualifying run. I don't know why he's super slow, and it makes me wonder what this year is going to be like for him. Because he's got to start thinking long term with this game.
Yeah, it's definitely time for Larson to start thinking about his future. It's clearly going to be a bad at least a rough start to speed weeks for these guys because you look at it, Larson qualified 32nd on pole day, wrecked in the Clash, a pretty hard crash for them. They ruined that car. The car's toast. They've got a lot of work to do. I think Thursday's really big for them confidence-wise because if you get caught up in another wreck or if you run in the back all day in the duel, you go into the Daytona 500 with absolutely zero confidence, and I think that's really bad for Kyle Larson because this is a race where you can't be afraid to make the big move and make the race-winning move. Kyle Larson in that team, I don't think has the confidence right now. And unless something changes really quick, I don't think they will have the confidence to be able to compete for a win. And if Kyle Larson goes winless again this year, I don't see him. I think that there might be a split upcoming with all that Chip Ganassi Racing is doing to develop their future right now. And Kurt Busch probably leaving as well. I don't think that we see Kyle Larson back if he doesn't win this year. I think he moves on.
You got to see some progress from Kyle. You really do. And it's at the point where he's got to do better. He's got to win a couple races, and Ganassi has to start worrying about falling behind a little. They've always been a second-tier Chevy team, but now it's starting, their third tier in the sense of, all right, we have HMS, their best Chevy team.
Yep.
And then we have, you have Richard Childress Racing. And then you have JTG Dollar. They're falling. That's where Ganassi's falling. Ganassi's falling to that JTG place, and you don't want to be there.
Yeah, and, this is one of those places for Ganassi where we know the talent is there with Kyle Larson. He is one of the most talented drivers in the garage, and I don't think that there's any doubt about that. But, you know, especially in a race where equipment really matters, if you don't have a good car for Daytona, then you're not going to run well. You could put, you know, Richard Petty in his prime in a slow car at Daytona, and he wouldn't race.
You got to be able to compete in the draft. You got to be able to compete. Look, you can have a car at Daytona that is a 20th place car. That's fine. But you have to have a 20th place car at least to be able to get yourself in the middle of that pack. And then you can make moves from there. But I think it's going to be interesting to see how Kyle Larson does this weekend. You know, if I'm Larson, I think about hanging back. I think about letting the big one happen and then just trying to sneak my way up and steal a top 15 out of this week to get some confidence. But, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how they do.
Yeah, and, you know, we talked about it. CGR, they are supposed to be right up there with Hendrick and Richard Childress. I mean, this is a team that has the driver talent to be above Richard Childress. And the way that Hendrick and RCR have run this week, or this weekend so far, and I'm sure they'll continue to run this week. They have, you know, I think it's been 1 and 2 between those two teams. Hendrick and Richard Childress, I think, have been the best two teams at Speed Weeks. Maybe Penske second, but RCR's right there. Chip Ganassi Racing in the same Chevys has been a huge disappointment. And now that they have their all-star lineup of drivers, they aren't fielding mediocre drivers anymore. They have two. Kurt Busch is a Cup Series champion. He finished in the top 5 in points last year. Kyle Larson, same thing. I mean, he is one of the most talented drivers in the garage. You can't go into the season like this. This is just a terrible start. So that brings us. That ends our recap of the weekend's action and now brings us into the preview of this weekend's race.
It's going to be so much fun. I'm so excited to watch this race because there are so many good stories that are going to happen this week. First off, you got some cars that are trying to. Do we got a new photo for this segment yet?
We will.
We will. What's his photo he's transitioning to? I'm like a kid in a candy store with this. This is so cool to have behind us.
There.
Oh, we got the Daytona back behind us.
The Daytona
okay, we got the Daytona, but this is going to be a fun weekend because you got some cars that are still trying to race in. You have some cars that, like we mentioned, you know, Martin Truex, Bubba Wallace didn't really do fast and didn't do the best in qualifying, but have fast draft cars. You know, you got Ty Dillon, who's a dark horse. You got Danny Hemrick. I love Daniel Hemrick. I've been singing Daniel Hemrick's praises for a while now on this show. And
Mr. Consistency.
He's gonna bring it to the Cup. He's gonna be Mr. Consistent in the Cup. I think he might be the best driver in that RCR stable right now. I
think we're going to see a really good year out of Austin Dillon, but I think Hemrick.
I think Hemrick might make the playoffs. I really do.
That's bold. I mean, you know, once again, we have to take Daytona with a grain of salt. Hemrick's looking good, but, you know, Alex Bowman looked really good last year at Daytona 500 qualifying as well, and then didn't.
I take Daniel Hemrick as a guy who makes the playoffs because I think he will Mr. Consistency way himself into one of those last seats, that 15 of 16 seat. I think he can pull it off. I think he can point himself in, and that's going to be important. Then you have some newcomers this week. You know, Daniel Suarez, he had one race with Stuart Haas. I like that 41. I like the red. They've changed the red just a little bit, just enough so you notice it.
Right.
It's like, oh, that's a nice paint scheme this year. It looks good on a Mustang. What's your favorite story going into this week as we go to the preview part?
My favorite part every year going into the duels is that this is our first taste. The Clash, we get all the stars. The duels, we get all the rookies, all the lower drivers with new teams, you know, all the guys that are looking to have a breakout year after either not racing the series last year, coming into this year, or, you know, coming off of a bad year. And we get to see, I think, the first kind of big-time strategy play of the year as well, because the duels are so interesting because you've got two strategies that you can choose. You can choose to be careful and say, okay, I am not going to tear up my car. Start in the back of the pack. I'm okay with that for the 500 because, you know, your car that you run in the in the duels is your Daytona 500 car. So you can choose to play it safe, stay conservative, and take care of your Daytona 500 car. Or you can say, I want to get up front and stay up front.
Full send, baby, full
and
send.
go full send and try to win this race and get the points. And, it's going to be interesting to see which drivers go for that. And I think that is going to be even bigger than ever this year because we are seeing a lot less passing than usual. It is much more difficult to get up through the field with this single file racing. We talked about the last driver to win from the front from the pole was Dale Jarrett in 2000. I don't know. Have you ever seen the 2000 Daytona 500, Dustin?
It was boring.
It was boring. I think there was 14 total lead changes in that entire race. That was before, as you see on our Michael Waltrip Daytona 500 winner from 2001. That was before they added the top rail on the roof of these cars, and it was just
Slow.
really difficult to pass. They were slow. You couldn't get any momentum. That was the worst restrictor plate racing that we've seen. I think this is the second worst.
We saw just as bad in Talladega last year. So if I am a driver, I'm going for it. I'm going full send because what's the worst that's going to happen? You're going to tear up your Daytona car?
Right.
Like, there is no guarantee that even if you... One of my favorite things is when the guy riding at the back of the pack somehow gets taken out by the big one, because it happens, You'll be towards the end of the pack, and then somebody will come down and hit you. There's no guarantees in this race.
Yeah.
And I would rather start Daytona in third or fourth. I'd rather start Daytona in the top 10 where, something's not going to happen than start Daytona in the mid-20s. And there's going to be a lot of people racing for that. And you saw last year how making those aggressive moves, Bubba Wallace had a really good showing in the duels last year, and it translated really well to the second place finish.
Yeah, and it got him into the second place for the 500 too.
Dylan had a good showing in the duels last year. It got him that Daytona 500 win. I think you go for it. I think, if you ain't first, you're last. And I think for a good amount of this teams here in Daytona, this is a chance. You look at a guy like Matt DiBenedetto. What would a dual win mean to him?
Right.
What would it mean to go out and win a points-paying race before the Daytona 500 to get some faith in that team?
Yeah.
You look at Denny Hamlin, didn't have a win last year.
It's a confidence booster.
Confidence booster. You look at Jimmy Johnson, he didn't just won this past weekend, didn't have a win last year either. You look at some of these guys who the winless streak is there, and you say, why not go for it? And then you got the guys who are trying to race into the field. The 27's locked in on speed. I think Truex is locked in on speed. But the rest of Ryan
it's the people that are locked. Truex is not locked in on speed. The two that are locked in on speed are Casey Mears, who had a very impressive qualifying run for a team that was thrown together like last week. They're unsponsored. They just have a pink 27 on their car.
They'll probably pick up a sponsor this week.
Yeah, threw the team together last week. He goes out and qualifies ahead of Kyle Larson on speed. The other one was Tyler Reddick in the 31,
which is an RCR powered
an RCR car. Reddick, the Xfinity champion, obviously making his first start. But I think that you've got to go for it as well because track position is going to be key. If all these guys are running around the top again, there's not going to be passing lanes. You come out to try to make a move and try to make the pass. You're going to go to the back. Track position was huge in the Clash. It's going to be huge in the 500 as well. I think that you do what you can to get up front in the duels. If you wreck your car, so be it. You'll start from the back. But you gotta go for it here and try to get some of the other cars because I don't think there's going to be a lot of passing.
You look at the '96 of Parker Kligerman and Gaunt Brothers Racing. That's got a TRD engine in it this year. He's got to get in. Truex does got to get in. Gong has to get in. Plenty of good restrictor plate drivers need to get into this race, and then you have other guys. Kyle Larson, like we mentioned, a dual win would be big for him. And then, Ryan Newman with a new team, Ricky Stenhouse with a new team, You
look at Paul Menard, who was just robbed of a race win. You could see the dejection on his face after he was taken out on what was effectively the last lap of the Clash. He's got one career win, points, non-points, and it was in 2011 at the Brickyard. Paul Menard hasn't won a race in forever. And I can tell you right now, and the Wood brothers are feeling the same way. They haven't won a race in a while either.
Last one was Ryan Blaney's first one.
Right.
And that was a fun race at Pocono.
Right. But this is a team and this is a driver that are absolutely desperate for.
This is a team that's had a lot of speed in a lot of places, and they have been snake bitten like crazy last year. Like Paul Menard could have won 2 or 3 races based on the speed that they unload. It's a Penske car. Yes, it's a Wood Brother. But it's a Penske car. Like, so they'll be nice and fast. It'll be interesting to see. I think there's a lot of incentive to go into this race and do well. And I love how it's on a Thursday night. I think I love how, Thursday night I can get home from whatever I'm doing Thursday night. Oh, it's Valentine's night.
Yes.
Oh, nice. I get to watch NASCAR. I'm home that night.
NASCAR is my
Allie
Valentine.
will kill me, but I get to watch NASCAR.
Yeah, one last call for phone calls here before we preview the Daytona 500. You want to talk about the Daytona 500? You want to talk about the clash from yesterday? Get in 802-528-5315, and we'll talk some racing with you here on the Inside Groove. But the big race is coming up on Sunday. The most exciting race of the year, it always is, the Daytona 500, NASCAR's Super Bowl, as many call it, the Great American Race. All this work that we've talked about through Speed Week starting last Friday all the way up to Sunday, it all comes down to a 500-mile race for a win that could change lives and careers in an instant. We've seen it happen so many times before. Who are the favorites for this race, Dustin?
Well, you got to give favoritism to HMS because they showed speed in qualifying, even though
as reluctantly as you
as much as I don't want to, I have to. Along with HMS, I want to give some RCR. Will have a good RCR and their affiliates will have a good showing. I expect the 3, 13, 8, and 43 to have a good weekend. JTG always puts 2 in the top 10. I don't know how. They just do. It's just that Daytona voodoo.
In Priest's rookie race, you think that he'll get a top 10?
It's JTD voodoo. It really is. They just do it. It's the ghost of AJ Allmendinger, basically. It's going to be really interesting to see because this race is the last one with the normal restrictor plate package too. Right. So you want to go out and you want to win that race for historical reasons, but the fact that you don't know how the racing's going to be for the rest of the year. If you can get locked in now to the playoffs, that sets you up just fine for the, Atlanta the next weekend where it's going to be like, oh, here's the new package. How are we going to run in the draft? How are we going to do this at Atlanta? So you want to get out there. You want to win that race. So my favorites would probably be Chase Elliott. Austin
Chase
Dillon,
Elliott's due to win a restrictor plate race.
Kurt Busch, Ricky Stenhouse. And a dark horse favorite of mine would be Paul Menard. If I had to pick 5 favorites off the top of my head, those would be my 5 favorites for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this could be the year. I think, you're going to see your usuals. I think Hendrick's going to run up front for the most of the day. I think Penske's going to run really well. I think Brad Keselowski,
he hasn't won a 500 yet.
I think this might be the year that Keselowski does it. If I had to choose one favorite, I think it would be Keselowski. I think, though, that the Toyotas are going to have a really, really good race. They aren't doing this. They haven't. This is kind of the culmination of, I think, of their efforts over the last 5 or so years.
Well, they got 5 strong cars in the pack,
right?
And that, Matt, and they have. If the Gaunt Brothers 96 makes it, and they'll have 6 decent cars in that field, and that'll be big for them.
And so they've kind of had time to figure things out. They kind of run on their own path, as we've seen. They practice by themselves in their own little pack. They like to do everything together in the Daytona 500. I think, you get enough of these cars still running with 10, 15 laps to go. I think it's going to be very, very tough to beat a Joe Gibbs Racing car. I think that Martin Truex Jr. could be another big-time favorite. Finally at the mainland with Joe Gibbs Racing. I think that, putting him and Cole Pearn combined with the full-time Joe Gibbs Racing power, I think that's going to be incredibly dangerous this year. I think Martin Truex, not only one of the favorites for the race, I think one of the favorites for the championship this year as well. So I think it's one of those guys. As for a dark horse, I always turn to the David Reagan and Michael McDowell cars at Front Row Racing. I've talked about them earlier. they run so well at the restrictor plates. I think Matt DiBenedetto is another big-time dark horse.
I think that Benedetto is a good big-time dark horse. He almost won it last year in a Go Fast car.
Right.
If he can almost
a Go Slow car.
If he can almost win it in the Go Fast 32, imagine how well he can do this year. The question is going to be, if the big one happens, when the big one happens, who does the big one take out?
Yes.
Because if it's a stage one big one, everybody will calm down and we will get single filing. If 10 cars get taken out in the first stage, everyone calms down. But if it's like last year where the big wrecks came in the last 20 laps or so, it's anybody's ball game. It is whoever is in the right spot at the right time. We saw it with Bubba Wallace. We saw it with Austin Dillon. We saw those 1-2 cars yesterday. Right place, right time. Missed the wrecks. Camarola had a chance to win last year. Then he got wrecked. So it's going to be really interesting to me to see who can survive the mental game of chess that is Daytona, because this is a race unlike any other where you need to be aggressive, but you can't be too aggressive. You need to have track position, but it's hard to get track. This is the biggest chess game race of the year in NASCAR because it's like, what is your move gonna be? And we saw it with Chase Elliott. You have
to time everything perfectly and make everything happen in the right kind of setting. And if you don't, even if you do, you could get caught up in the big wreck. So Daytona is the hardest race in all of racing to win. We've seen some incredible drivers go their entire career without winning. It took Dale Earnhardt 20 years to win this race. He won all the shorter distance races at Daytona because those were easy.
Had like 7 championships by the time he won a Daytona 500.
He had 7 championships. He won 34 races at Daytona. And this man, it took him 20 years to win the Daytona 500. Tony Stewart, another guy, such a great restrictor plate racer. He's second all time and wins at Daytona. He won numerous Bud shootouts, numerous twin 125s, which are now the duels. Numerous July races, but he never won that Daytona 500. He finished second in it a bunch of times.
Looking at our last 5 winners who are still active drivers, well, 6. Let's throw the 6th one on there. 2010, Jamie McMurray, active drivers. So I'm leaving out Bain, Kenseth, and Earnhardt. So McMurray, Johnson, Logano, Hamlin, Busch, Dillon. Looking at all those guys, if I had to pick a favorite from those previous winners, I'd probably pick Joey Logano. Joey Logano is sneakily putting a Hall of Fame career together, especially with his championship last year.
Well, he's in the Hall of Fame now with the championship. I think he automatically makes it in.
I think Joey Logano is putting together this weird, really good career where I could see Joey Logano be the dark horse who wins a race like that because he's already done it before. He knows what it takes to be first at the Daytona 500, and he could do it again. What would it mean for NASCAR if your champion won the Daytona 500? Have him do the Meteor Tour again? That's a lot of press for one dude, and Joey's only 28, so he's still very young, can be very marketable.
The last time, if I remember correctly, the last time the series champion won the Daytona 500 was also Dale Jarrett in 2000. But I think that we're looking at a race that could easily turn into a race where there's not much passing, very similar to that 2000 Daytona 500. You look at these stats here that we've brought this race up a couple of times. I think it's for good reason because I think that we're going to have a very similar race to that one on Sunday. So we'll see how it goes. But in our last 5 minutes here, we're going to bring back something we did.
We're going to actually do this year?
A little bit last year.
We're going to bring back the picks.
We're going to bring back the picks. Our Daytona 500 fantasy draft, we each get 5 selections. The combined finishes of those drivers, whoever goes to our total point score for the season, whoever has the lowest point total at the end of the season wins a prize that we will determine at some point. I don't know what it'll be. We'll figure it out. So I'll let you go first, Dustin, since it's the first race of the year.
So the first race of the year, who am I going to pick? I'm going to take Joey Logano right off the top.
Okay. And so you've got Logano. I'm going to take Keselowski.
Write him down. Write him down over there.
All right.
Write down car numbers.
We're going to write him down. Light him down here.
Write him down.
I'm going to go with Keselowski. And are we doing a snake draft?
Do a snake draft.
Okay. My other guy that I'm going to take is... I got to go with Truex because I talked him up.
I'm going to take Chase Elliott. Take Chase Elliott in that 9. That'll be my second pick. Just so I can have my heart destroyed when he wrecks. Just so I can cry when he wrecks. So that'll be my second pick. So I get the 22, I get the 9. I'm going to take Danny Hemrick. I'm going to take the 8.
Danny Hemrick, wow. That's a dark horse pick. And you've left me all the good Hendrick cars.
I have.
I want to take Johnson here, but he wrecks in every Daytona race, including the Clash. The Clash, he's somehow
wrecked in the race he won.
He wrecked in the same race he won. So that was interesting. I am going to stay though with Joe Gibbs Racing and go with Denny Hamlin. And then I think I'm also going to take Ricky Stenhouse. Stenhouse has shown really impressive stuff.
If you're going to leave me Jimmy Johnson, I'm not going to. I'm going to take Paul Menard.
Paul Menard, good pick.
And I'm going to take Matt DiBenedetto. I think we should give ourselves 6. Give ourselves 6 for this way.
A 6th one? Okay.
So you pick the next 2.
All right. So my final 2 here. I think that I am going to go with Daniel Suarez. I think that he has a good chance at this one. And my other one is going to be Ryan Blaney, that last Penske.
So my last pick, you know who hasn't won a Daytona 500?
A lot of people.
You know who's been dominant in the last 5 or 6 years and hasn't won a Daytona 500? Kyle Busch.
You know who always blows a tire?
I think Kyle Busch is getting it this year. We need it. We need the Kyle Busch. I want the Kyle Busch gets it because I want to see NASCAR Twitter and NASCAR Facebook just go up a flame. I would love to see Kyle Busch get it. Everyone hates Kyle Busch.
I would love to see the reaction on NASCAR Facebook.
NASCAR Facebook. There will be nothing better than NASCAR Facebook the moment Kyle Busch wins the Daytona 500.
Yeah.
I think it's his time.
And, and you look at it, I think it is Kyle Busch's time. Kyle Busch, love him or hate him, I think that it's time for us to respect him. I think that,
Kyle Busch is the second best driver in this generation behind Jimmy Johnson.
Yes, we'll get into it a little bit more probably next week.
90 seconds. We can get into it now.
But, I think Kyle Busch is this generation's Dale Earnhardt because he draws that fan reaction. You say Kyle Busch in front of a NASCAR fan, there's not going to be anybody who's like, oh, he's all right, doesn't really mean anything to me. Just like Earnhardt was back in the day, you either love him or you absolutely hate him. And he's dominant, he's an aggressive driver. I think he's really grown up the last couple of years. And, he's one of those guys. The only thing that Kyle Busch doesn't have on his resume, he's going to win 100 races, I would bet you, in the Cup Series. But he doesn't have the championships. So that's my Kyle Busch.
40 seconds left. Give me one weird thing that's going to happen on Sunday.
One weird thing.
One weird thing.
I think that there will be a single car crash. It's just somebody wrecks by themselves.
All right, you want my one weird thing?
Sure.
A car ends up on Ryan Newman's hood. I think it happens again.
How is that weird? That's a common thing.
It's a common thing, but I think I haven't seen it happen to him at Daytona. It's going to be his first race with Roush. It's going to end up, there's going to be a car that ends up on his hood.
All right, well, tune in next week to see how our weird predictions came out. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the Daytona 500, everybody. This has been the Inside Groove on Northwest Access TV. I'm Nick. He's Dustin. Enjoy the 500, everybody. We'll see you next week.